Page 284 continued. The peasantry was divested more and more of its homogeneous and egalitarian character. Many indications of unequal distribution of land in the villages are available. We hear not only of Brahmanas but also of the chief Brahmana, Mahatama, Uttama, Krishivala, Karshaka, Kshetrakara, Kutumbin, Karuka, land endowed Brahmanas and Agraharas. We also hear of Kshudra Prakrit or petty peasants, not to speak of Meda, Meda, Andhra and Chandala. It is obvious that certain people in the villages enjoyed a greater share in the sources of production and apparently possessed more land than they could manage directly. Such people got their lands cultivated by petty peasants either through leaseholding, sharecropping, or through the system of serfdom. We have therefore no means to establish that most peasants living in the villages were in complete control of the means of production. Para. Terminological studies throw interesting and revealing light on the relation of the peasant to the land in early India. The English term peasant which literally means rustic, rustic or countryman, can be translated into Janapada, an inhabitant of the countryside. The Janapada, or the territorial unit formed in the countryside, was considered to be a source of revenue, for it was inhabited by active peasants capable of bearing taxes and fines. Punishments 27. Naturally, when the peasantry was oppressed, it led to their revolt or Janapada Kopa, which term occurs in Kautilya's Arthashastra 28. Curiously, the term Janapada is not in much use in medieval Sanskrit literature, although it occurs in early medieval inscriptions. In medieval times, Jana came to mean a dependent who was valued and acquired because he supplied labor power. Thus, he could be a servile peasant. What is more significant, in several Indo-Aryan dialects of Bihar, the term means field laborer. In practice, some of these laborers, page 285, are given small patches of land for their subsistence. This practice was apparently the legacy of the medieval system, according to which Jana or field workers were possessed by and transferred to landed magnates, as can be inferred from both inscriptions and works on horoscopy 29. This would show that the tribal Jana with an egalitarian ethos is reduced almost to a serf. Para. The term used for the peasant is in medieval text and particularly in inscriptions signify the change in the nature of the peasant's relation to the land he cultivated. From the age of the Buddha to the advent of the Gupta period, tax-paying Vaishyas continued as an omnibus order comprising mostly peasants. But by early medieval times, they were reduced to the position of the Sudras, who, in spite of having acquired peasanthood, continued to bear the hallmark of servitude. 30. Gahapati, literally head of the household, was the term used for the land-owning peasant in early Pali texts. 31. Typical of the middle Ganga plains where the first large states appeared. He seems to have enjoyed substantial autonomy in his unit of production, but the term almost disappears in land grant inscriptions. Gahapati or Grahopati become village headman in later texts. 32. A clear term for peasant is kshetrika or kshetrin 33, which means controller of land, but even this is sometimes understood as an agriculturist or cultivator in later texts and lexicons. From kshetrika in Assamese is derived khetiyaka 34, which means cultivator or husbandman and not necessarily the owner of the field. A common term used for the peasant in many grounds, particularly from eastern India, is kshetrakara 33, which literally means cultivator. The term seti, S-E-T-I in Marathi is probably derived from kshetrakara 36 and does not always mean owner of the land. Some other terms used in inscription are Karshaka 37 and Kutumbin 38. The term Kutumbin gives some indication of an autonomous peasant family, but it occurs mainly in early land records from eastern India and Madhya Pradesh. Later grants from eastern India replace it by Kshetrakara or Karshaka. In Gujarat and Rajasthan, and Kutumbika loses his status, for he is sometimes transferred to the beneficiary along with the land. 39. According to Yankavalkya, circa AD 300, the Karshaka is a mere cultivator in the service of the landowner, page 286, or Kshetra Swamin, whose field lay under the general control of the king, Mahipati 40. In the Chandela grants from eastern Madhya Pradesh, the Karshaka was made over to the assignee along with the village 41. Land grants also use the term Halika 42 or plowman. Sharecroppers are called Ardhika, Artha Sirika or Artha Sirin. In literature, the word Kinasha, plowman, is also used, 43. Evidently, these terms have nothing to do with control over land. The term Kisan, so common now in India, is derived from Krishana, or one who plows. The word Krishi Bala, 44, or cultivator, is also frequently used in medieval texts. The term Langalo Pajivin, or one who lives by ploughing, is also used in the Brihat Samhita 45 para. A review of the terms used for the peasant in medieval inscription and literature fails to present the peasant's image as a controller of land. On the other hand, we have such technical terms as Bhokta, Bhogi, Bhogika, Bhogijana, Bhogapati, Bhogapatika, Bhogi Kapalaka, Bhogi Rupa, Mahabhogi, Brihad Bhogi and Brihad Bhogika, which are generally used for those who enjoyed landed estates, 46. Here we have not taken into account many other terms connected with Raja, Ranaka, Samanta and Mandaleshwara, who happen to be big landed intermediaries. The contrast between the two types of terms is obvious. Some people are meant to cultivate and some to enjoy the fruits of production, although in this category people did not share the surplus equally. There is nothing to show that the peasants who produced were in firm and independent control over their holdings. And finally, there was the state symbolized by the king, whose general authority over land was recognized by numerous epithets used for him in early medieval records, 47 para. The point that there were superior and inferior rights in the same piece of land was made much earlier, 48, but the common phrase, quote, means of production, unquote, was not used in that context. It may be added now that the practice of granting a village with all the possible taxes and impositions and with all its resources created a kind of feudal property in contrast to peasant property and community rights. The new phenomenon was an irritant to medieval jurists and law commentators who found neither a sanction nor a precedent in the early law books. Page 287. Therefore, Viganeshwara, the famous author of the Mitakshara, which enjoyed authority in a large part of the country in legal matters, propounded the principle of the popular recognition of property. He and his followers, including Mitra Mishra, maintained that property has its basis in popular recognition without any dependence on the Shastras. 49. Commenting on a passage of Gautama 50, Horodatto, a lawgiver of about the 12th century, expressed a similar view. According to him, even short-term enjoyment of bhumi, which is explained as cultivated fields, kshetra, orchards, gardens, etc., Aramadika, confers property rights on the enjoyer. 51. Short-term enjoyment probably means a period of less than 10 years. 52. The complexities caused by the superimposition of new rights on the means of production hitherto effectively controlled by the peasants, partly because of their free access to village resources, baffled the medieval jurists who had to recognize the multiplicity of rights in the same piece of land. It is worth reproducing a quotation which I have used earlier, Cologne quote. The Indian jurists took it for granted that the incidence of particular manifestations of ownership might differ, while the swatwa, within bracket rights, 53, of the king, the satwa of the landowner, the swatwa of the tenant farmer, and in an extreme case, even the swatwa of the mortgage in the possession, as against a trespasser, were all comprehensible under the single term of property, unquote 54 para. The law books show that in law as well as in actual practice these rights were graded. In the Indian context, one could therefore talk of the varying degrees of control over land and not exclusive rights of either the landlord or the peasant. Nevertheless, the grants show an increasing tendency to establish the superior rights of the landlord at the cost of both the king and the peasantry, so much so that ultimately assignments are converted into virtual estates. Para. More effective control over the means of production was obtained in the transfer of land to beneficiaries. Many big plots of land in Vidarbha and Maharashtra were assigned to Gads and Brahmanas under the Vakatakas and also under the Rashtrakutas. For example, 8,000 Nivartanas of land were granted, page 288, to 1,000 Brahmanas by Pravarasena, 55. Similarly, 400 Nivartanas of land were granted to a single Brahmana, 56. Again, the same measure of land was granted to a god, 57. Further, 2,052 Nivartanas of land were granted to Brahmanas, 58. We learn from earlier authorities that in the Deccan, land measuring 6 Nivartanas was considered sufficient to maintain the family of a Brahmana, which may have comprised 5 to 8 members. But large stretches of land, as mentioned earlier, could not be cultivated by the Brahmana beneficiaries themselves. Even if labor in a Brahmana family was available for smaller pieces of land, they would not actually cultivate it because of social inhibitions. More importantly, grants of large plots introduced an element of direct control of the beneficiary over the means of production. He could make arrangements for cultivation and produce crops of his choice, para. An important factor which gave the beneficiaries general control over the means of production was the conferment of seigneurial SCIGNEURIAL rights on them. The charters authorized the beneficiaries to punish people guilty of 10 offenses, 59, including those against family, property and person, and also empowered them to try civil cases, 60. Further, royal officers were not allowed to enter the territory of the beneficiaries, 61, and cause any kind of obstruction in their functioning, 62. All these amount to manorial rights and might even enable the beneficiary to force the peasant to work in his field. The right to try cases on the spot involving the imposition of fines could seriously interfere with the process of production. The political and judicial, that is, non-economic rights, thus helped the beneficiaries to exploit their estate peasants economically in an effective manner. This may have been a successful way of governing the vast population because crime could be curtailed on the spot. At the same time, these non-economic rights served to enforce the general economic authority of the beneficiaries over both the means and process of production. It may further be noted that in many cases the beneficiary was empowered to adopt all measures to enjoy the benefits of the village, and the term used for this was Sarvopaya-Samyuktam, 63. He was also authorized to enjoy the fruits according to his will. If we carefully examine the phrase Sambhogya Yavadicha Kriya Phala, 64, it would mean that, 289, the beneficiary could intervene even in the process of production. If a person is entitled to the enjoyment of the fruits of the process of production, according to his direction he may develop a natural tendency to control the process, Kriya itself, on which the nature and the amount of yield depend. Sometimes whatever belonged to the village, Swasambhoga Sameta, was to be enjoyed by the beneficiary. 65. The beneficiary was also granted the village along with all its products. Sarvotpatti Shahita, 66. The Chandela charters from eastern Madhya Pradesh named the crops that were produced in the donated villages. Does this mean that the peasant could not alter the pattern of cultivation? At any rate, all such provisions could induce the grantee's interest in the means and process of production. It would be really extraordinary if the beneficiary did not keep an eye on the resources, processes, and fruits of production in such cases. Para. It is not clear how the peasants were provided with agricultural implements. The charters authorize the beneficiaries to enjoy all that is hidden under the earth. This would amount to giving mining rights to the beneficiaries. It is well known that mining rights belonged exclusively to the king. The king may have acquired this monopoly at the initial stage as the head of the tribe or community. Once this exclusive control over iron and other types of mines passed into the hands of the beneficiaries, they could also control the supply of agricultural implements to the peasants. But in pre-feudal times, the big landowners did not have such rights in lands. Mining rights belonged to the king, who symbolized the community, and the peasants may not have experienced difficulties in procuring agricultural implements. Para. The successors of the king and people in power are asked to observe the terms of the grants, 67, and those who disobey are threatened with the use of force, 68. Some warnings clearly mention corporal punishment, Sharira Dandam, 69. The threat to use force is found mostly in the grants from Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra and Karnataka, and the earliest example belongs to the 4th century Pallava grant from Guntur district. In addition, the enemies of the land grant were, quote, blessed, unquote, with all kinds of curses and the most heinous scenes. Page 290. The idea that a peasant was the complete master of the means of production is also belied by the philosophical teachings found at the end of most grants. The grants underline the instability of life. Apparently, this instability is based not merely on the idea of death, which overtakes everybody ultimately, but also on the fickleness of fortune. The concept of the fickleness of fortune or mobility of Lakshmi is mainly derived from the frequent transfer of control over the means of production from one hand to another. It would therefore appear that ideology derived from the relations of production strengthened the general control of the beneficiaries over the means of production. Ideology and rituals were used to indoctrinate the producers in ancient times also. Through ideology, rituals, and administration, the priests and warriors regulated production and distribution in pre-feudal times. But now they acquired an effective hand in the mode of production because of their general superior control over land, which was the chief means of production. The beneficiaries started with the state-sanctioned title to various types of dues delivered by the peasants to the state, but in course of time he made his claims so comprehensive that through his local presence and delegated administrative powers he could convert his title into possession and could treat the donated village as his estate. Clearly, the peasants had to reckon with the control of the beneficiary over the village resources. The real problem, therefore, is not to demonstrate the autonomy of peasant production, which in any case was drastically curtailed in the land grant areas. It is more worthwhile to examine the position of the peasant population working in the land grant areas and that of similar people working in the non-land grant areas in medieval times. 70. Since references to palm leaf, talopotro and birch bark, bhurjapotro charters, shasanas, even for religious purposes, are found in Assam and Madhya Pradesh, it is likely that many such grants were issued in favor of both religious and secular parties. We learn how those Patra grants were burnt and replaced by copperplate charters in Assam 71 and Madhya Pradesh 72. It may help to identify and plot the donated villages and plots of land on maps region-wise within a short time span, say half a century or so. Page 291. We have shown earlier that in the donated villages the beneficiaries enjoyed superior authority over the means of production. Donated fields, many of them very large in area, were without doubt under the direct and complete control of the beneficiaries, who manipulated their production resources and processes. How this influenced the course of production in quote, free unquote villages has to be investigated. Para. The argument that the landed beneficiaries were mainly concerned with the problem of surplus collection needs to be re-examined. The question of surplus collection and or distribution cannot be viewed in isolation from that of the pattern of production. In a feudal system of production, we expect the lord's share, called rent, in labor and cash and slash or kind, and this is coupled with a patron-client system of distribution, primarily between the peasant and the landlord. For surplus collection, superior rights in the land of the peasants become the precondition. More surplus seems to have been extracted because of more production. In pre-Gupta times, the surplus was mainly collected by the agents of the state in the form of taxes or by priests in the form of gifts. A few landowners working with the help of slave and hired laborers existed in the age of the Buddha. State farms are mentioned in Kautilya's Arthashastra, but state control could operate only in small areas. By and large, the settled part of the country had independent peasant units of production and also some amount of market economy. The market economy, however, was not so strong as to enable the rich landowner to invest his capital in new enterprises and work for profits, and eventually lead him to the capitalist path. At best, a millionaire like Anathapindika would purchase land to donate to Buddha. There could be other such examples. Payment in cash could be made for the sale of cereals and for the purchase of petty commodities by the peasants. Generally, in pre-feudal times, the priests, warriors, and administrators were entitled to the surplus in the form of taxes and gifts for service rendered, but a large part of these payments were made in cash. Peasant units of production first appeared in the age of the Buddha and not in post-Maurya times. Slavery was neither preponderant nor negligible in production. Large holdings, including state farms, page 292, were worked by slaves and hired laborers in the middle Congo plains. But big landowners were swamped by peasants. The Vaishya, who was almost identical with the peasant, was the principal taxpayer. His counterpart in the Buddhist idiom was a peasant householder who contributed to the increase in the production of cereals and paid taxes to the state. Gahapatiko, Karakarako, Rasibhadhako. Thus, the peasant units of production functioned more or less effectively in pre-Gupta times, but later the authority of the peasants over these units suffered erosion because of the appearance of landed beneficiaries, supplemented by the large-scale disappearance of trade and urbanism. In India, the problem of the rise of the landed magnates is not connected with, quote, the decomposition of the slave mode of production, unquote, but with the decreasing control of the peasant over his unit of production coupled with his restricted access to the agrarian resources of the community, para. To think that the fight for a share in the cake does not necessarily affect the production of the cake is to ignore historical experience. It is not true even of capitalist societies in which sheer fights eventually lead to structural changes. In the conditions prevailing in early medieval times, the beneficiary demanded his pound of flesh because he claimed superior rights in land. If the grant was meant to maintain the beneficiary and meet his domestic and religious requirements, the peasant could be compelled to produce certain cereals which were badly needed by the beneficiary, para. If parts of the products are placed at the disposal of the grantee, what is the difference between enjoying the means of production, that is land, and the fruits of production? Land does not mean anything without its products. Whoever seizes land rich with crops, Shashya Samriddham Vasundharam, is guilty of great sins, so goes the medieval saying. Thus, land carried meaning in the context of its products. Surplus was collected after the production of the crop and also in the course of its production. On-the-spot collection and quick administration could be the most effective way of managing a large population, para. The land charters show that in the donated areas, the landed beneficiaries enjoyed general control over production resources, para. Page 293. They did not enjoy specific control over every plot of land that the peasant cultivated, but we cannot question their control over the plots of land that were directly donated to them by the king, sometimes along with the sharecroppers, 73, and weavers, and sometimes along with the cultivators, 74. This raises the problem of serfdom. It is thought that feudalism is identical with serfdom and that serfdom is the only potent method of exploiting the peasants. It may be very effective, but other forms of servitude imposed on the peasantry do not prove inoperative and unproductive. After all, what is the essence of serfdom? In this system, small satellite farms are attached to big farms to assist working on the big ones. Big farms are directly managed by manorial magnates but cultivated by those who possess small plots. Therefore, serfdom means giving more surplus labor than surplus produce. But in the Indian context, surplus produce is extracted more through the general control exercised by the landed assignees than by the employment of serfs. A serf occupies some land and provides his family with subsistence. He pays rent in cash or kind for exploiting his unit of production and also spends extra hours laboring on the field of his lord. Even if he uses his extra hours on the field occupied by him, the extra yield does not necessarily stay with him. On the other hand, it is collected by his lord in the form of extra rent in cash or kind, para. Harbans Mukhia contends that serfdom is an incidental feature in India, 75, but the evidence cited so far would show that it is hardly so, 76. In any case, if the lord gets his share without reducing too many people to serfdom, what basic difference does it make to him or to the social pattern? A landlord may collect rent and services from his tenants for the plots of land they hold and cultivate. Or he may get all his plots cultivated directly by the serfs, who are given small pieces of land for their subsistence. Both systems are concerned with extracting the lord's share. In both, the cultivator is a dependent peasant under the exploitation of his lord. And in both cases, the social structure is beset with the internal contradiction between the landlord and the actual tiller. A beneficiary may not possess big plots, but he possesses too many plots, which make management difficult. Page 294. In fact, laws of partition of land became effective in Gupta and post-Gupta times, 77, and they contributed to the fragmentation of land. Fragmentation of land is also indicated by epigraphic cell transactions found in Bangladesh. 78. Therefore, if a landlord possesses too many plots, tenanting and sharecropping may be more convenient than getting the land cultivated by serfs. Para. Some scholars believe there was no scope for the rise of serfdom or forced labor because the soil in India was very fertile, 79. But we have indications of forced labor in the Middle Ganga basin where the soil is most fertile. Till recent times, poor tenants belonging to lower castes were forced by landlords from upper castes to work in the fields at meager wages. 80. Peasants were compelled to plough the land of the landlords and do various kinds of odd jobs for them in other fertile areas. This is known as hari and begari in the entire Ganga basin. The medieval term for the former is hali kakara, 81, and for the latter visti, from which beth begari is derived. The Pala charters found in Munger, Bhagalpur, Saharsa, and Nalanda districts, all forming part of the Middle Ganga plains, mention the term Sarva Pada Paririta. This means that the peasants were subjected to all types of forces, labor and oppression, but when the village was transferred to a beneficiary, he became entitled to these advantages without the interference of the state. Forced labor may have originated in less populated areas, but not necessarily in less fertile parts. Once its usefulness was recognized, it spread to more populated regions. Para. Feudalism flourished in paddy-producing areas. Paddy production requires 50% more man-hours than wheat production. According to a popular saying in Patna and Gaya districts of Bihar, wheat cultivation can be undertaken even by a widow, a symbol of helplessness in the countryside. Wheat requires less and barley even less labor, whereas paddy transplantation means shortage of labor in the peak season and prompts landlords to seek recourse to forced labor. The term Sotpadya Manavisti is used frequently. 82. It has been translated to mean the use of forced labor as occasion demands. Since the term qualifies the donated land or village, it might mean the labor to be generated or produced by the village in future. 83. This was a significant development in a good part of North India. It would imply that besides customary sources of forced labor, new sources could be exploited by the beneficiaries according to their needs. Unfortunately, page 295, these sources are not specified in medieval records. That there were various types of forced labor is clear from the use of the term Sarvavisti 84 in many land grants, particularly in the Vakataka grants. These many types may have included the use of labor in the fields in central and western India. However, in northern India, Visti meant the right to compel the rural population to construct forts and roads and to help the authorities to transport. Vetti is frequently mentioned in South Indian charters. At present, in parts of North Andhra Pradesh around Srikakulam, Vetti, VETTI, stands for bonded laborers who are forced to do all kinds of agricultural operations and various types of ancillary and odd jobs. Vetti may signify a similar practice in parts of the peninsula in medieval times also. The evidence from the Skanda Purana produced by B.N.S. Yadava leaves little doubt that hundreds of people were compelled into forced labor, and this was evidently meant for production in medieval times. 85. Hence, serfdom cannot be dismissed as an incidental feature.